All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Hare Krishna. This morning we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 9, verse number 29. Before we do so, we recite the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 29. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ma Veda Garbhagastandrim Sarga Udyamamavaha Tanmaya Paditamiyagre Yanmam Pratyate Bhava. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ma Veda Garbhagastandrim Sarga Udyamamavaha Tanmaya Paditamiyagre Yanmam Pratyate Bhava. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ma Veda Garbhagastandrim Sarga Udyamamavaha Tanmaya Paditamiyagre Yanmam Pratyate Bhavan. Magvida Garbhadastandrim Sarga Udyamamavaha Tanmaya Daitamagre Maya Te Bhavan. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Veda Garbhadastandrim Dhammakamavaha Mayapamagre Bhavan. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Namida Garbhadastandrim Argamudyamamavaha Tamayavaduttamagre Yanmam Prardayate Bhavan. Word for word translation. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. The Lord, the personality of Godhead, said, Ma, do not, Veda Garbha, O you who have the depth of all Vedic wisdom. Gatandrim, become dejected. Sarge, for creation. Udyamam, enterprises. Avaha, you just undertake. Tat, that, which you want. Maya, by me. Apaditam, executed. He, certainly, agre, previously, yat, which, mam, from me, prarthayate, begging, bhavan, you. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead then said, O Brahma, O depth of Vedic wisdom, be neither depressed nor anxious about the execution of creation. What you are begging from me has already been granted before. Purport. Any person authorized by either the Lord or by his bona fide representative is already blessed, as is the work entrusted to him. Of course, the person entrusted with such a responsibility should always be aware of his incapability and must always look for the mercy of the Lord for the successful execution of his duty. One should not be puffed up because he is entrusted with certain executive work. Fortunate is he who is so entrusted, and if he is always fixed in the sense of being subordinate to the will of the Supreme, he is sure to come out successful in the discharge of his work. Arjuna was entrusted with the work of fighting on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and before he was so entrusted, the Lord had already arranged for his victory. But Arjuna was always conscious of his position as subordinate to the Lord, and thus he accepted him as the supreme guide in his responsibility. Anyone who takes pride in doing responsible work, but does not give credit to the Supreme Lord, is certainly falsely proud and cannot execute anything nicely. Brahma and persons in the line of his disciplic succession who follow in his footsteps are always successful in the discharge of loving transcendental service to the Supreme Lord. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Tetanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Tute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Technology. Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for coming this morning. And we're discussing from Canto 3, Chapter 9, verse number 29. I'll just read the translation again. The Supreme Personality of Godhead then said, O Brahma, O depth of Vedic wisdom, be neither depressed nor anxious about the execution of creation. What you are begging from me has already been granted before. So, we've just concluded the section where Brahma has offered his prayers to the Supreme Lord to be blessed with the devotional attitude prior to him commencing this task of creating the planetary systems and filling it up with living entities. And obviously it's just not that, there's a lot more involved. So he's requesting the Lord, please bless me with the devotional attitude. And as you can see, Lord Brahma is actually feeling depressed. Now, if we are in that situation, I don't know how would it be if we were given that task of, now you're responsible for this project, you take ownership of it, you've been given a budget, and all the resources are there for you. On the contrary, we'll feel quite excited. We've been given responsibility, that means I'm special. But here Brahma is actually feeling quite anxious of what's to happen. And further on, in the following verses, you see the Lord will respond to Brahma saying, situate yourself in penance and devotion, and by the virtue of that, you'll be blessed with instruction from within. And actually described in the following chapters, in chapter 12, which describes the first creation, how creation first starts. And it really, when I was reading through it, a lot of times we say, when we, as followers of Srila Prabhupada, trying to execute the orders of, Srila Prabhupada, the spiritual master, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's a thankless task. We are having to share this message of bhakti with others. And at the level of Lord Brahma, he has to create this universe, which is, in the bigger sense, a plan of the Lord. So what's the first thing that Brahma creates? It's the first thing that he creates, that's described in chapter 12, verse number 2, is that he has to create 5 different kinds of nescience, 5 different kinds of ignorance, because the moment the living entity comes in contact with this material world, because the living entity, or who's a parcel of Krishna, belongs to the spiritual world or spiritual reality, when he or she comes in touch with this material reality, it has to get a false set of identification. You have to identify with the material energy because we are alien to the material energy, but because we want to be independent of Krishna. So we have to accept an identification that's false. And that's the first thing that Brahma has to create, the 5 kinds of nescience. And it's described, what is the 5 kinds of nescience? Self-deception, sense of death, anger after frustration, sense of false ownership, and ultimately this is resulting from the illusory bodily conception. Sense of death. Yeah. So I'll repeat it again. Self-deception, sense of death, anger after frustration, sense of false ownership, and illusory bodily conception. So if you're keen, you can look at chapter 12, verse number 2, which describes it in detail. And after Brahma creates these, he just feels so disgusted. He's just like, okay, what have I just done? But again, he's doing so because this is an instruction from the Lord to do. And it doesn't, it gets worse after that because his plan is he's been given the instruction to fill this universe with living entities, and the first living entity are the 4 Kumaras, and the moment he approaches the Kumaras with the plan, can you please fill up this universe, they're like, no way. Leave us out of it. So they're gone, and then he gets angry. From him comes Rudra, from between his eyebrows, and he tells Rudra, please expand the universe, and the generations that come from Rudra, the grandsons and the future generation, they start to devour the universe. So just imagine, you tell someone, please go and, you give them a task, please go and clean up this room, and next thing you know, they go into the room and they start bringing the room down, and you're like, oh my God, what do I do now? And obviously, further on, he creates a set of living entities who start chasing him for copulation. So it's just like one after the other. Brahma's like, come on, Krishna, give me a break. In between that, he has to chant his rounds. He has to do all these things. So it's a thankless task. It really... But again, he's doing it, and he's requesting the Lord for him to not be conditioned by this material energy, and in the sense that he doesn't think of himself to be the proprietor, and not to be carried away by the name and fame. So interestingly, just a point, and we'll expand on this earlier, Brahma is praying, or he's asking the Lord for him to not be attracted to the name and fame, to not be carried away by the, all the credit that would come to him for creating this universe. And on the contrary, as I was reading through it, I was thinking that when some task is given to us, when we are asked to head up a project, or whatever service may be given to us by authorities, we are not thinking, what will I do with all the name and fame that will come with it? We start off with thinking, by this project there'll be some failure, and obviously with that failure will come criticism. So I really don't want to take up that criticism. That's me as a conditioned living entity thinking about it. But here Brahma is thinking, no, how is it that I will think of you, my Lord? How can I be sure that I always give the credit back to you? This past weekend we had a little ceremony here of some of the devotees that we had participated in the Bhadra campaign, and they had bought Bhagavatam sets for themselves, and then they had also gifted those sets to some of their family and friends. And Ganesham Prabhu here, who's giving a little talk on, thanking those devotees who had participated in it, and he made a very interesting point that was told to him by his mentor or his senior years ago, that at any given time, whenever you receive, because you've been gifted with this transcendental knowledge, and it's come to the mercy of a devotee, so you should always come to Shri Shri Radha Gopinath and offer that to Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. And he said something very interesting which touched me in a very unique way. He said that every day I pray for the devotees that I know who are, in whatever way I can, that are engaged in this services of expanding Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission here in Sydney. And he was told by his seniors that as you give credit to Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, and as we pass on the true glory of whatever we are to achieve to Shri Radha Gopinath, then we'll never feel this sense of the service that's a responsibility to be a burden. I remember a few years ago one Sankirtan devotee told me this, that every day or whenever he would distribute books, he would try and jot down the names of the devotees that he would distribute the books to. And he would always come in front of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath and make a prayer for those people that he's distributed the books to. And pray to Radha Gopinath, please help them or assist them in their Krishna consciousness or in their journey to your lotus feet. And he said, because we need to understand that Radha Gopinath is the true beneficiary of all sacrifices that we do. It's they who we are trying to please. So that was a very important point that really drove this point that Lord Brahma is asking for. Why do we ask for this devotional attitude? In one pastime in India, Srila Prabhupada, whilst the Juhu temple was being constructed, he was sitting on the terrace of one of the homes of the life members. And he, as it was, I think perhaps it was between 6 and 7 p.m., so the devotee was fanning Srila Prabhupada, and it was quite, there weren't any devotees there except for this servant. So as he was fanning Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada said, do you hear something? And the devotee said, no, Prabhupada, I don't hear anything. Again, do you hear something? He said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I don't hear anything. He said, that's the point. I don't hear the devotees here during Arati. Where are the devotees? He said, oh, Prabhupada, they've gone to the city to collect and to raise funds for Shri Radha Vinod. He said, that's not what I meant. We should go out and do whatever is asked for us in terms of assisting Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. But we should always make sure that we always come in front of the deities, offer our prayers, offer our gratitude, and be present in the Arati in glorification of the Lord. Because if we don't do that, we'll just end up being like the mundane materialists, where we'll be so absorbed in doing the acts, which, well, ultimately it'll come to a point where we'll feel that we are the proprietors of it. So that's something that I felt that was quite interesting. Now, there's an interesting conversation that happens between Prahlad Maharaj and Nrsingadev in the 7th canto, 10th chapter. In that, it's after Nrsingadev has been, after Hiranyakashipu has been killed. Nrsingadev then, obviously, Nrsingadev is in a very angry mood, and all the devotees there, all the demigods that assemble there, ask Prahlad Maharaj to please go and pacify the Lord with your prayers. And Nrsingadev is actually, he feels that affection for Prahlad Maharaj, and he asks Prahlad Maharaj, please ask for some benediction. And interestingly, he tells him, my dear Prahlad, I want you to enjoy the opulence of the demons. And Prahlad Maharaj tells him, I am your unmotivated servant, and you are my eternal master. There's no need for being any other relationship other than the master of servant. And in that purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that this is the mood of the devotee. The devotee is always looking for ways to serve the Lord and His representatives in whatever way they can. They don't get carried away by what's being offered to them. And actually, if you just fast forward that because this conversation that happens is chapter 10, verse number 6. If you go to verse number 13 in that purport, Srila Prabhupada, there's a Sanskrit word known as kushalena. And the word for word means acting piously. However, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes a point there that one should live in this world very expertly. In this world, one has to act impiously and piously and he specifies the word impiously because there's danger at every step in this world. And as devotees, as we try to perform our service, try to please the Lord, there is a possibility that we'll create enemies. However, a devotee is always, because the devotee is always under the protection of the Lord, he or she doesn't feel, he's always willing to go that extra mile just to please the Lord. There was this once in Pakistan, Brahmananda Prabhu and I can't remember the other devotee, they were traveling. So it was quite interesting if you read about it. They hitchhiked all the way from America or from Europe to Pakistan. And in those days, obviously, we didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have any other forms of communication. So I don't know how long was that trek, but it lasted maybe a couple of months. They get to Pakistan and then they start doing Harinam on the streets. They don't know of anyone, so they started doing Harinam on the streets. And there were people there who were just coming and spitting on on those two devotees. So again, it's a thankless knowledge. They're creating enemies. And Srila Prabhupada, the very moment that he heard about it, he said, ask them to come back. They don't, these people don't deserve the mercy. So, but again, once I remember Vaisheshika Prabhu was mentioning this, obviously those devotees that go out in books every day, or in whatever way when we try to interact with the public, there may be some interactions may be good, some may be bad. I remember a few years ago, I think it was here in Sydney, I think we were doing, it was a holy festival, and I was with a devotee that I wouldn't name. This devotee told me, look, there's a gentleman right there. Why don't you approach him with, and maybe you can share what book, that you have. I'm like, okay, I'll go up. And then I said, did you try? He said, yeah, I tried, but it didn't work. Maybe if you go, you'll be successful. I said, okay. So I go up to this person, and this person is just walking straight. And I'm at the back of this person, so I'm walking. I'm like, excuse me, sir. And, he didn't listen. Or he pretended not to listen. Then I asked again, excuse me, do you have a minute? Didn't listen. On the third attempt, he looked back, and he just took out his knife, and he started chasing me, and I started running back to the book table, and I told the devotee, gee, that was a knife. You're like, oh, Prabhu, sorry, I thought it was a water bottle. Had I known, I would have never asked you to go there. So devotees undertake all kinds of risks. Why? Because of Krishna's promise in the Gita, 18.68, one who shares this knowledge with others is most dear to me. That's Krishna's promise. And a devotee's life is solely governed by this one promise, that whatever we do, as long as Krishna is pleased, or Krishna's representatives are pleased, then it's a success. So, coming to the point that I was making earlier, in the face of our duties, there'll always be this opportunity, there'll always be this fear of criticism. And if you read the pastime of Bali Maharaj, it's described in the 8th canto. Obviously, Bali Maharaj is one of the Mahajans, and he's setting an example for us. Bali Maharaj, obviously we won't get into that whole pastime, but he had to reject his own spiritual master. And he rejects everything and goes to Krishna, and what happens? Krishna, he's being criticized, that you have not held true to your promise. And if you read Canto 8, chapter 21, verse number 28, the translation is, after Bali Maharaj was deprived of everything, he's arrested, it seemed like he lost his bodily luster. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes that if in this material world where one is very famous and opulent, obviously that adds to that person's bodily luster. And when that person is deprived of it, then you lose your bodily luster because you've lost all these external coverings to your, to your identity. But on the contrary, Bali Maharaj became famous for giving up everything to the Lord. So that if you were to just picture that, just for a moment, imagine yourself being there. You've held true to your promise, and now you're being accused. And you're just not being accused by yourself. You're in the presence of your followers. Bali Maharaj was there in the presence of his wife. And how much more humiliating can that be? It's just something we can't even fathom. So, in this... but again, as we see, Bali Maharaj became famous for that. And not only was he famous just for that one act, but the Lord reciprocated him with an unfathomable way. Once His Holiness Radha Maharaj, I was listening to Chaitanya Charan Prabhu say this. He was telling Chaitanya Charan Prabhu about some form of outreach that he was doing, where he said, and he was quoting a statement from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and can't remember word for word, but where greater need exists, greater mercy awaits. So where there's a greater need, there's always greater mercy that's going to await you. So in this pastime of Bali Maharaj, the Lord reciprocated with him in such a unique way that he agreed to become his doorkeeper. So by giving to Krishna, one is never a loser. One is a winner by many, many. And if you even see the life of Srila Prabhupada, this is one devotee after Srila Prabhupada left, physically left this planet. He said that I had seen Srila Prabhupada in the 1960s when he was in Vrindavan, when it seemed that he didn't have any of these possessions. And I saw him when he came back from America, where he came with his disciples. Pretty much he, at least externally, materially, he had everything. But he said Srila Prabhupada was the same person. There was no difference in Prabhupada that was, before going to America and after he came back from America. In fact, one reporter in a testimonial, or I was hearing Sutapa Prabhu say this, that he was observing Srila Prabhupada, and he said something that impressed me most about this gentleman is that he was never there to impress anyone. He was never there to impress anyone. He wasn't there to just, Srila Prabhupada always fixed in his commitment and his determination. So similarly with Bali Maharaj, even though he lost all his possessions, but he didn't lose his determination to serve Vamandev. So the last point that I'd like to make here is that how, in one sense, Lord Brahma is asking Krishna to be an instrument. And interestingly, if you see Bhagavad Gita chapter 11 in the universal form, when Krishna displays the universal form, and he says, Kalosmi, time I am, devourer of the great world. And in that verse, there's a word known as Rite, R-T-E. And that Rite can mean except or without. So the Lord tells Arjuna, except for you, everyone, it's my plan that except for you, everyone else will be annihilated. But even without you, that'll happen. So, you become Nimitta Matra Sarva Sachin. You become my instrument. And, so how are we going to, our meditation should always be to Radha Gopinath, how can we be the instrument of your compassion? And again, like I said, whatever that comes in that, whilst we're, doing whatever we are in our service to Sri Radha Gopinath, to spiritual master, to Srila Prabhupada. One verse that really comforts me from the Bhagavad Gita is 18.48. And that is, in this world, everything, let me just read it. Every endeavor is covered by some fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore, one should not give up the work born of his nature, O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of fault. So, we should always remain fixed in a determination. We should always pray for the mercy of the Vaishnavas, of our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, Sri Radha Gopinath. And in that lays our true glory. If you see the life of Jatayu in Ramayana, externally it was a failure because he wasn't able to save Mother Sita being abducted. But Lord Ram was pleased with the service attitude of Jatayu. So what's in our hand is our ability to do, or we do our task, we do our service, but then the result, that's in the hands of Krishna. And as Krishna describes, time it is that determines, it's time that will say how things are going to manifest. That's beyond our understanding. But what we can do is perform our duties nicely, serve the devotees nicely, and always be an instrument of the compassion of Radha Gopinath and Srila Prabhupada. So I'll end here. If anyone has any questions or comments. Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Yeah. So with Bali Maharaj, obviously, think one thing that people, or someone asked this the other day, we were just discussing amongst ourselves, and he said that Bali Maharaj rejected his guru. So does that mean we reject our guru? And obviously that context in which he's rejecting it is, because the guru asked him to go away from Krishna. Yes, following in the footsteps of the Mahajans, how I understood, or at least what I've heard, is that we pray for their mercy. We are always, those Mahajans, even we have, one thing that I'd once heard, which has always stuck with me since then, is that if Krishna sends you guidance in the form of, that too mature guidance in terms of a devotee who's, or however that may be in whatever form, Shiksha Guru, Diksha Guru, or in whatever way that manifests, if he sends you mature guidance, then that's his blessing upon you. So we always, like I said, we work under some authority here, and at least for us as conditioned souls, or trying to perfect our life, in service to Radha Gopinath, if we are fortunate enough, and if you just take account of it, we are all quite fortunate, to have good association, and that'll definitely be something that will help us understand some of these subject matters more seriously, and how can we apply this in our life. Thank you. Anything else? Yes. Thank you. How do we know that Krishna exists? Okay. Well, there are 3 levels of understanding that. Now, in the Gita and in the Bhagavatam, there are 3 levels at which we in this world can realize that. One is Krishna, or God, is actually all-pervading, pervades everything in this universe. So, for example, if I were to just step out and what's needed for me to survive, right? I need to breathe in, right? I need to breathe air. Where is that air coming from? Is that something that I have manufactured? No, it's coming from there is a presiding deity that oversees, this arrangement of air. Is that deity or is that personality independent? No, there is something above that's, giving them the power. So, God is all-pervading. Secondly, is that God is omnipresent. He's present in everything. So He's present in all of our hearts as a super soul, guiding us in each of our endeavors. Now, like I said, depending on where sometimes people may say, okay, that means that if someone wants to go and kill someone, is that being also guided by God? Well, the answer is that, man proposes and God disposes. It's to understand karma and how that works, that's very intricate. Thirdly, we understand that ultimately God is a person, Krishna is a person. Because everything in this world reminds us, the most complete relationship that we can have is with persons. And where does that sense of personal belonging come from? That's coming from Krishna. To me personally, if you were to ask me how do I know that Krishna exists, is because I see a representative of Krishna, that's Srila Prabhupada, acting in such a way that I would say it's like if I were to not recognize the existence of Krishna by not being present, by not seeing the presence of Srila Prabhupada in his contribution, it would be like me just turning a blind eye on things. Because when I see a follower or someone like Srila Prabhupada who's dedicated his life and who's every nanosecond of his life, you can just clearly see that it was just in service to Krishna. And not only that, I see so many devotees, wonderful devotees that are serving in such a way that by their own body, mind and words, that it's just self-evident to me that there has to be something that they're getting a higher taste for, and that's obviously coming from Krishna. Thank you. The experts are in the room. Well, good question. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So if you read the Vedic text, you won't come across the word Hindu as such. The word Hindu comes from it's more of a modern day term that came from when the British were living in India. There was a river named Sindhu, and actually, if you study history in that sense, they just said people living on the other side of River Sindhu are known as Hindus. So now your question, does Krishna religion come from Hinduism? Well, in a broader sense, just as a means of convention, it just is understood to be that Krishna consciousness, or the International Study of Krishna consciousness, is a branch of Hinduism. But what Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita is that what Krishna's message in the Gita is that it is Sanatana Dharma. It's the eternal position of the living entity, which is you and me, to be always serving God. And the overarching message of the Gita is that we all have to follow Sanatana Dharma, which is nothing but having a loving relationship with God. And Krishna explains that in greater detail in the Gita. So, yes, if you were to ask as a matter of convention, yes, it's considered to be a part of Hindu religion, but even ontologically, this knowledge that we hear in the Gita is 5,000 years old, at least as per written evidence, but it predates that to the dawn of mankind. So if you would like, if you have a copy of the Gita, that'll basically give all of this information, at least through the different chapters. Okay, thank you. Okay, I've gone past my time. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gita Go Premanande. Srila Prabhupada ki.